So here we go. Hi, Erkan. Great that we can meet today, at least online, and to have a small conversation for our series CP Meets, in which we talk with the people we work with for the Collective Practices program. And with you, we've been working on, or you are leading the series called Orientierungsplan. And I would like to talk a little bit about the background of Orientierungsplan with you today. Maybe before we can start with my questions, could you quickly introduce yourself with your own words?
Sure, yeah. My name is Erkan Affan. I am a curator and a writer from London. I came to Berlin a year and a half, 2 years ago now. My work focuses generally on like the intersections between migration, diasporic identity, gender, sexuality. And I guess my work is very location specific in the sense that it depends on where I am. Right now I'm in Berlin. I've been, like I said, here for 2 years, so it's focused predominantly on Berlin, but in the past it's also focused on London. I guess some of the projects which are kind of like core to my practice are the fact that I co-founded Queer Arab Barty, which is the Berlin-based collective, with 4 others in 2019. I am soon to be taking over the Baerenzwinger Berlin, which is like this bear kennel turned landmark in Mitte, with 2 others, with Sunny Est and with Tiwa Barnosa. And I also have this commission in London called University of Queering, which is going to be subverting the idea of the neoliberal university to do like a 2-day series of lectures and talks about being from West Asia and North Africa, and with the intersection of queerness and transness. So essentially, I jump from commission to commission at the moment, making sure that I'm fed and able to do the things that I can do and want to do. So yeah. And also, actually, I should mention, so on a personal level, my background is, I'm from the border of Turkey and Syria, from a place called Hatay. My family have a lot of generational heritage that comes through in different ways. So all my grandparents were born Syrian, my parents were born Turkish, and I was born British. So there's these different layers, essentially, that I try and unpack and also try and project into my work in some way. So this particular commission is very special to me because I'm focusing on my region, where I'm from, where my family are from, and trying to bring that into a spotlight in some way.
How does your practice as a curator and writer, which often, not always, can be a very solitary work, how does it relate to collectivity and collective practices?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's quite difficult, really, because, I guess a lot of the stuff which I learned, at least discursively, came from academia. And academia is quite a solitary experience. It's a very self-perpetuating, elitist experience in my sense, where like you have a very small bubble of people that you're perpetually trying to impress, and yourself is included in that bubble. And so your work becomes that solitary thing of writing for yourself rather than writing for anyone else. I guess my desire to be a curator was actually to jump out of that bubble that I had in academia, and to try and work more collaboratively with other people in my community. And I guess that's what I've tried to do through being part of these collectives, like with Queer Arab Barty, and working now with collective practices as well. And it's a positive experience. I enjoy it a lot more than the solitary work of academia. And I think it's also important in a sense where like one person will never really have everything considered, but when you're working in a group of people from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences, there's less likelihood for something being omitted, and there's more likelihood for multiple nuances to be explored rather than just one, so to speak. And I think that's the power of collectives. And also, to be honest, as BIPOCs, like, as minorities, as queer and trans people, Unfortunately, the reality is that when you're just by yourself, you're not really heard. It sucks, but that's the truth. And I think that there's people who definitely have more proximity to being heard by themselves. I probably fall into that category because of the privilege I have with my accent and my language. But I think you're heard a lot more when you are a group of people, and I think for us that's really important, and that's why I also want to be part of collectives rather than work just individually.
I think that's an important context also for our way of seeing it for the CP program. The series Orientierungsplan actually resonates a lot with one of our thematic explorations that we have as a conceptual structure for the CP program. And one of these explorations is called Knowledges. And through Knowledges, we're aiming to look at and discuss and scrutinize hegemonic ways of producing and distributing knowledge. And I think it's about knowledge and knowledges, what's at the core of Orientierungsplan. So can you maybe tell a little bit more about what you're what you're discussing? What is it that you're addressing through the series, and who are the people that you're inviting, for people who don't know?
Yeah, well, I think it's important, obviously, that you mentioned the knowledges thing, because it applies so much also to the power and the hegemony that is exerted onto the region that my family are from, the artists that I invite to be part of this project are from. And I think that, the people I invite talk a lot about sexuality, about gender, about migrant identity, about diasporic identity. But these are people who have an authority on the subject through their lived experiences and their professional experiences, through what they know to be true. But unfortunately, these aren't the voices that are amplified in the public. I think about when I first came to Germany 2 years ago, when I did my research for my master's on queer Turkish-speaking migrants in Berlin. The research that I found about Turkish-speaking migrants in Berlin in general was written by Germans. It was written by white Germans. It's like we're always a subject of study, but we're never subjectors of our own studies, We never really get to be the person of our own stories, telling our stories and writing our stories. And this applies so much to the production of knowledge as well. And the intention with this program is essentially to change that and to allow people who have that direct experience, like I said, who have that professional experience, to be able to come onto a show and actually talk about what it is they do, what it is they live, what it is they work in. And we had this with the nuances of the people we've already invited. I mean, Emre Buse, our first guest, is a scholar born in Istanbul who talks about gay ethnic pornography in Europe. And he brings a very nuanced perspective as someone who would fall under this categorization of non-white, non-Western producer of knowledge or analyzer of knowledge. And the same with our second guest, Maysa Leheddeb. She is German born to Tunisian parents, and she speaks about the racism and the lack of representation that North Africans have in Germany. And, it's very easy to sit there and read an article about a German about the statistics of racism that occur in Germany, but I would much rather hear that from someone who actively experiences that themselves. Like, we have this phrase in English, like, hear it from the horse's mouth. And it's literally, I would rather hear it directly than through these, people who, third parties who have no idea but want to create analyses about it. And with the remaining guests that I hope to bring onto the project, it's the same thing. It's, inviting people who have a right to talk about it, because it is also just about a right of authorship. Who has the right to talk about a certain experience, I think that the person who has that experience has that right to talk about it. I think that everyone else is a guest in that narrative, and people need to remember that they're a guest. And unfortunately, in the productions of knowledge that we're so used to seeing, guests forget that they're guests and they treat it like they own the house. Does that make sense as a metaphor? I feel like I'm going a bit abstract, but the point is, I want someone who owns a narrative to talk about it. I don't want someone who's renting that narrative in order to make money to be the one talking about it. And that's the point of inviting these artists. And I guess a question to listeners in general is, how much do you know about the Middle East and North Africa, West Asia, North Africa, MENA, as it's called, in relation to topics such as sexuality and gender identity, in relation to topics such as diasporic identity, how much do you really know? You know, this is an opportunity for you to be able to hear from people who have these experiences what the reality of these identities really mean, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes total sense to ask that question. And in general, I think in a large part, our society has the problem to not ask enough the people that are involved in certain discourses, but just talk about these things without including those who are at the center. But that also raises the questions. I mean, with the Orientierungsplan, for the moment, we planned 5 conversations. Our program is restricted by time through funding possibilities. That is the number of conversations at the moment that we can organize, which is extremely limited considering this how large and diverse this field is of discourses, backgrounds, identities, experiences that you are addressing or talking about here. Like, what are the biggest challenges for you in your work, and who you invite, what kind of topics you bring up, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, as you mentioned, we're quite restricted in terms of the timeline, in terms of the budget and things like this. So unfortunately, this series is not going to be all encompassing. It won't be. There's too much to be able to ensure is represented. And I think there's also this fear of not wanting to be tokenistic and not wanting to fall on performative representation for the sake of representation. I know for a fact that from 5 conversations, we barely touched the surface, you know, of the variety and the nuances and the experiences of identity and, you know, the different practices professionally that people may bring from the region into this context. It's never going to be fully represented. Hopefully this project can continue down the line past this commission in a collaborative way, where we can invite artists that grow and add to a roster of knowledge that we have. But through these 5 things alone, you know, unfortunately, it's not going to really give that much. But I hope that it can be a precedence for future conversations in some sort. And I hope that it encourages other people to also do something like this. I mean, this is already done, you know, the Queer Arabs do this incredible podcast where they invite queer Arabs to come and talk about the work that they do. There's, I'm sure, many other podcasts that also do the same thing. Mine is just trying to add to that, you know? I don't want to give this insinuation that I think that we are really like out here as like a beacon of knowledge, because we're not. It's just trying to contribute to us not being erased discursively from the environments of sexuality, gender, migrant identity, diasporic identity that we rarely really get given a voice to talk about. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to add to that, but yeah, that's it really.
For the in the concept where you describe Orientierungsplan, which is on the website, also you say that it is the conversations will be led with mainly or only Berlin-based artists, researchers, and activists. Can you tell us about your decision to restrict it to specifically the city?
I mean, as a curator, I live in Berlin, and I've been here for 2 years, and I have some experience of how people in my community navigate what work they do. I don't think that I'm a voice of authority in any way, shape, or form. I don't really think anyone is. No one can really represent anyone but themselves. But I feel like I have more confidence of the type of people who I feel like I can invite to have a conversation with me that work in Berlin than I would, for example, compared to Amsterdam, or compared to Beirut, or compared to Istanbul or Cairo, or Marrakesh or anywhere else, because these aren't places that I am directly involved in. Even London, I haven't been there in 2 years. I wouldn't really know who to invite to have this conversation in London, because I don't work there. I don't navigate. I'm not a member of the community there myself, you know, anymore at least. So my decision to involve Berlin-based artists is discursively one that is based from the fact that I'm part of this community and inviting other members of the community to come and speak. And I think this ties in a lot to what Lila Abul-Lughod, who is a Palestinian-American scholar, in the 90s, she spoke about this idea of Hafi anthropology. Like, I'm not trying to academize this conversation or academize the work that we do, but this idea of Hafi anthropology is really interesting, where you can get a really good understanding of something when the person who does the research, so to speak, is half part of the community and half not part of the community. And this was the intention with which I came to Berlin 2 years ago as a Turkish speaker as well. I came because I thought it would be really easy to remove myself contextually as a Londoner from the experience of Berlin, but at the same time to also have some intersectional understanding as a fellow Turkish speaker. And that's kind of the same thing here. It's like, I'm not a porn scholar like Emre Buse is. I don't work in film like Maisa does. I'm not a designer like our next guest is, but I also do have a familiarity of the context in which they do their work, because I also, like them, I'm from the same region and I'm working here as an artist in Berlin. I also think more than that, it's also a practical thing as well. I mean, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I think it's definitely really important to be able to digitalize space and to have conversations that don't rely on physical accessibility alone. I think the coronavirus has really taught us that. But at the same time, you know, I don't have the ability to create a rapport correctly and have a 1-2 hour discussion on Zoom. I need to be opposite a person and understand them and feel how they feel and really get things together. So yeah, that's the main thing as well.
Yeah, the fleshy and getting together part is definitely missing a lot, and it was kind of a really big restriction for us in how we originally conceived the CP program to what we can do now. But I think we can all learn from it, and we're happy that we still can have these conversations to a certain extent, and hopefully to be able to continue them in all different kinds of ways, both digitally and in person in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe talking about the future, we, as you said, we don't announce the name yet of the next guest, but we can already announce the date of the next conversation, which will take place or will be launched on October 30 on Kashmir Radio at 4 p.m. Berlin time, and I'm looking very much forward to listening to you and your next guest. So thank you so much for your time, Erkan, and for the insights into your reflections and the program, and talk soon, I would say.
Thank you.